The photograph was taken on a Tuesday morning in September of 1987, approximately 3 weeks after the events this account describes. It shows Dr. Caroline Marsh standing at the edge of a gravel lot outside the Manistee District Ranger Station, holding a cardboard box of field equipment. Her truck, a 1984 Ford F-150 in Forest Service green, is visible in the background, tailgate down. Her hair is tied back. She is wearing a canvas field vest over a flannel shirt, and she is looking at the camera with an expression that her colleague Tom Everett, who took the photograph, later described in writing as the expression of a person who has just remembered something they had been trying not to remember. She had driven 4 hours to submit her field materials in person. The district ecologist who received them, a man named Richard Faber, who has since retired and lives in Traverse City, told her in the parking lot that the measurements she had included would require additional review. She asked what that meant. He told her it meant additional review. She drove home. She filed a secondary report with her university department. She requested a follow-up and did not receive one for 11 months. When the follow-up arrived, it was a single paragraph. It thanked her for her submission. It noted the matter was under review. It provided no findings. Her name in this account is Dr. Caroline Marsh. That is not her name. She holds 2 graduate degrees, one in wildlife biology, one in conservation ecology, from institutions that would prefer not to be named in this context. At the time of the events documented here, she was in her 11th year of field work, the last 4 of which had been spent conducting a longitudinal ungulate population study across a 47 square kilometer corridor of Manistee National Forest in western Michigan. In the winter of 1984, she had located a hunter named Paul Wickens, who had suffered a cardiac event in a blind 14 kilometers from the nearest service road. She had kept him conscious, administered field stabilization, and navigated out using a compass bearing and a topographic map in conditions of near zero visibility. The responding paramedic noted in his report that her assessment of Paul Wickens's condition, provided by radio from the field, had been precise enough to allow them to prepare the correct resuscitation equipment before she arrived. Paul Wickens recovered. She had seen a coyote take a fawn. She had documented wolf displacement behavior in the Upper Peninsula. She had spent more nights alone in the forest than she had spent in her apartment in the 3 years prior. Before going further into Dr. Marsh's account, the case file contains one document that changes the shape of everything that follows. A county land survey addendum from 1952, filed under a category that was reclassified in 1957 and has not been declassified since. The events documented here began on August 9th, 1987. The detail that has never been resolved, that Dr. Marsh raises in every subsequent account, and that no reviewer has offered an explanation for, is this. The smell arrived before the silence, not after. Before. This is what she said happened. The Manistee National Forest occupies approximately 535,000 acres of the northern lower peninsula of Michigan, a mosaic of mixed hardwood, northern conifer, wetland, and river corridor that has been managed in its current configuration since the early 1900s. The Manistee River runs through the southern section. The Père Marquette runs through the northern. Between them, ridgelines, creek drainages, beaver impoundments, and a specific kind of forest that old growth advocates and timber management people have been arguing about for decades. Dr. Caroline Marsh knew this forest in the specific way of a person who has spent 4 years in a defined corridor, counting, tracking, and documenting the same population of white-tailed deer across seasonal cycles. Her study corridor ran northeast from a point on the Manistee River, 47 square kilometers. Terrain she had covered on foot more times than she had logged. She knew where the does yarded in January. She knew which ridgeline the bucks crossed in October. She knew the creek crossings, the browse areas, the mineral licks. She knew what the deer did when something was wrong. This knowledge, the baseline, the normal, the undisturbed behavioral profile of this specific population across 4 years of observation, is the foundation of what she documented in August of 1987. Without the baseline, the anomalies are anecdote. With it, they are data. The summer of 1987 had been wrong from the beginning. Not dramatically, not in a way that produced alarm or required response. Wrong in the way that someone who's been watching the same landscape across seasons notices when something in the pattern has shifted. The deer were moving differently, not dramatically differently, not fleeing, not abandoning territory, not exhibiting the acute fear response that a large predator intrusion produces. Differently. The mineral lick on the north drainage, which the does had been visiting on a predictable schedule for 3 years, had gone unused for 6 weeks. The browsing patterns on the east ridge had compressed. The deer were covering less ground per day than their summer range typically required. Dr. Marsh had filed a preliminary note on the behavioral anomaly in July and had attributed it tentatively to a dry year. The summer had been drier than average. The browse quality was reduced. Water sources were lower than normal. This was the most parsimonious explanation. She was not committed to it. She was watching. She went into the corridor on August 9th for a 4-day session, the last extended survey before the autumn observation window. Her colleague Tom Everett dropped her at the North Trailhead at 06:30. She would be at the established base camp by early afternoon. Tom would collect her at the South Access on August 12th. Standard protocol. She had done this configuration 6 times over 4 field seasons. The base camp was where she had left it in June. The waterproof crate, the bare canister, the established fire ring, the tarp rigged to the birch poles she had set in her second season. She had her field equipment, her food, her notebook. She had a compass, a topographic map, a signal mirror, and a radio that reached the Forest Service station at the south boundary in clear conditions. Tom Everett has since confirmed that on the drive-in, she mentioned the behavioral anomaly in the herd. She used the phrase wrong season. She said the deer were acting like it was November when it was August. He has said he thought she meant the dry year affecting the browse. He understands now that she meant something more specific. She was in the camp by 1400 and working her first transect by 1600. The first anomaly was at the clay bank. The clay bank in question is a section of exposed substrate along a small tributary creek, approximately 2.7 kilometers northeast of the base camp. The bank is a natural game camera in the sense that it preserves tracks well. The fine-grained clay holds impressions for 72 to 96 hours in dry conditions, longer in wet, and Dr. Marsh had been using it as a track station. since her second season. Every mammal species known to use this corridor had left tracks on this bank at some point across 4 years of monitoring. She reached the bank at approximately 16:30 on August 9th, the first afternoon. She recorded the tracks present: white-tailed deer, raccoon, mink, a single set of coyote tracks from an estimated 24 hours prior. Standard assemblage. She photographed the bank from 3 angles with the 35mm camera and continued east on her transect. She returned to the clay bank at 05:45 on August 10th, the second morning, in the specific pre-dawn light she had learned to work in. The 11-minute window before the sun cleared the eastern tree line, when the horizontal light revealed track detail that midday illumination would wash out. The track was there. She saw it from approximately 4 meters coming around the willow screen on the south approach. She stopped. She has described this stop as involuntary. Not a decision to stop, but the body's prior claim on the motion system before the cognitive assessment had completed. She looked at it for a moment from 4 meters. Then she approached to 1 meter and crouched. The track was in the clay at the water's edge. A single impression clearly defined. The substrate firm enough to have retained it from some time in the previous several hours. The shape of it was canid. The 4-foot loading, the pad configuration, the general geometry. But the scale was wrong. Not wrong in the way of a large domestic dog or a large coyote, which she had seen many times. Wrong in a way that required her to pull her scale card and measure before she would commit the observation to her notebook. The impression was 19.2 centimeters in length, 14.8 centimeters in width. The depth at the 4-foot was 2.3 centimeters in substrate she rated at moderate firmness. She looked at these numbers for a moment. A large male gray wolf, Canis lupus, produces a track in the range of 11 to 13 centimeters in length. The largest authenticated gray wolf tracks on record are in the range of 14 to 15 centimeters. The track on the clay bank at the tributary creek on the morning of August 10, 1987, was 19.2 centimeters long. There is no extant canid capable of producing a 19.2 centimeter track. She photographed it from 6 angles with scale references. She measured the depth differential between the 4-foot loading and the heel. She noted the substrate firmness. She looked upstream and downstream for additional impressions and found none. The bank above and below the one track was hard clay with no impressions, which meant the animal had stepped onto the clay at this one point only, which meant either the approach and departure were on rock or root or hard ground, or there was only one step. She recorded the single step in her field notebook. She drew it in plan view. She noted the dimensions. Then she wrote, beneath the drawing, in the margin of the page, animal weight estimate, 80 to 90 kilograms minimum based on depth at 4-foot. No reference for this animal in regional or national literature. Note, track shows medial pad separation, consistent with plantigrade tendency. Do not know what this means. She closed the notebook. She looked at the tree line north of the bank. She had been doing field work in this forest for 4 years. She had seen everything in this forest that could be seen. She looked at the tree line north of the bank and she understood in the specific way that her 11 years of field experience communicated understanding. That whatever had left that track had been in the forest north of this bank sometime in the previous hours, and that the forest north of this bank was the forest she was going to spend the next 3 days working. She went back to camp. She ate breakfast. She was on her next transect by 0900. At 1:32 that afternoon, she heard the silence. The silence of a forest is not silence. People who haven't spent extended time in the field sometimes describe wilderness as quiet, which is the description of a person who has spent their life in acoustic environments so loud with human production that natural sound registers as absence rather than presence. The Manistee at mid-August is acoustically complex. Insects, birds across multiple guilds, the wind in the mixed canopy at different heights, the movement of small mammals in the leaf litter. The corridor Dr. Marsh had been monitoring for 4 years had a specific acoustic signature that she knew the way she knew her baseline behavioral data. The silence that began at 1:32 on August 10th was the silence of the acoustic complex ceasing. Not fading, ceasing. She has described it as the difference between a radio being turned down and a radio being turned off. She was moving east on her transect, the recorder running, making field observations aloud in the protocol she had used for 4 years. And at 1:32, she stopped making observations because the forest stopped making sound, and the recording therefore captures the transition. The recording exists. Tom Everett has heard it. The timestamp of the silence is on the tape. She stood still. This is her account of the next 4 minutes and 31 seconds, which is the duration of the silence as captured on the recording. Field Notebook, August 10th, 1987, 1:32 p.m. Complete cessation of ambient sound at approximately 1:32. Standing on Transect 4, bearing 047 from camp. In mixed hardwood approximately 1.8 kilometers from Claybank. No wind, no insect, no bird. The cessation was immediate, not gradual. I am noting this because I have not experienced this before in 4 field seasons. I am standing still. I am checking my watch. The silence is total. 1:36 p.m. Still standing. Have not moved. Silence continues. I notice I'm not moving because I am not comfortable moving. This is a bodily response I'm noting as relevant. I have been in situations that produce discomfort, and I have generally been able to identify the source. I cannot identify the source of this response. The air is not moving. The canopy is not moving. I cannot see anything I should not be able to see. The recording captures Dr. Marsh's breathing across this period. It is controlled. Not the controlled breathing of someone performing calm, the controlled breathing of someone who has decided consciously to maintain the protocol of steady respiration because it is the most useful thing they can do. Tom Everett has noted that listening to those 4 minutes on the tape is one of the most unsettling 4 minutes he has experienced in a professional context, and he attributes this specifically to the breathing, the care of it. 1:37 p.m., the smell. I am going to describe it. Carrion, but not old carrion, fresh carrion. And underneath that, something I am going to describe as musk. Though it is not any musk I can reference in the literature, it is large animal musk. Very large. I am upwind of whatever is producing it. It is coming from my north. This is the detail that has never been resolved. The smell arrived at 1:37. The silence had begun at 1:32. The smell came 5 minutes into the silence, which means the smell came after the silence. But Dr. Marsh has stated in every account she has given that the smell arrived before the silence. This is not a small discrepancy. The recording is unambiguous. Silence at 1:32, smell described at 1:37. But she has been unwavering. She smelled it before she lost the ambient sound. She has described this as the one detail she would most like to be wrong about, because being wrong about it would mean the recording is a complete record and her memory has simply reordered the sequence. Being right about it means the recording is not a complete record. She does not know how to explain what a recording not being a complete record of an 11-minute window would mean. She is not prepared to not explain it. 1:43 p.m. Ambient sound returning. Not all at once. Insects first, then the first bird call from the south. The return took approximately 40 seconds. I have been standing still for 11 minutes. I am going to continue the transect bearing. The recording resumes ambient sound at 1:43. 4 minutes and 31 seconds of silence. She continued the transect. She did not go north. She's explained this as a deliberate decision. The transect ran east, and the smell had come from the north. And going towards something she could smell but could not see in terrain that limited her sight lines to 40 meters was not a decision she was prepared to make alone. She made camp early that evening. She sat at the fire for a long time. In the morning, the deer would not cross the creek. The question of the sequencing has occupied Dr. Marsh for 37 years. She is a scientist. She knows what the recording says. She has listened to it many times, and the recording is clear. The silence begins at 1:32, and the smell is described at 1:37. 5 minutes of silence before the smell. This is what the recording says. She also knows what she experienced. She has a memory of smelling it first. Not a vague memory, not a reconstructed one, but the specific bodily memory of an olfactory stimulus arriving before the acoustic one. She has cross-indexed this memory against other strong olfactory memories from her field career. The smell of a wolf kill in winter, the musk of a large bear at a salmon stream in Alaska, the specific ammoniac quality of a beaver lodge. And she finds those memories sharp and correctly sequenced, which is what she would expect. She does not find her memory of the August 10th sequence incorrectly sequenced. She finds it correctly sequenced in a way that contradicts the recording. One explanation she has considered: she smelled something before 1:32 that she did not consciously register at the time, and the conscious registration came later. And her memory has placed the registration where the stimulus occurred rather than where the registration occurred. This is a known feature of olfactory memory. The lag between stimulus and conscious awareness can be significant, and memory does not always accurately locate the moment of awareness versus the moment of stimulus. She has considered this. She does not believe it is the right explanation. She cannot say why it feels wrong. It feels wrong in the way that a measurement that is technically within the margin of error feels wrong when you know the instrument is good and the conditions were controlled. The explanation fits the data. The explanation does not fit what she knows. The smell itself. She described it in the field notebook as fresh carrion and large animal musk. In subsequent accounts, she has added a quality of warmth, as if the source was a body rather than a mark, and a directionality that was unusual. She says the smell did not diffuse the way an airborne dispersal would. She says it arrived from the north, fully formed with a precision that she associates with close-range proximity rather than long-range drift. She was upwind of the source, which means the source was north of her which means whatever was producing the smell was north of her, and she was smelling it because she was downwind. Between her and the source, 40 meters of mixed hardwood and the specific, broken visibility of a mature forest understory. She stood still. She has described, in the account she gave Tom Everett on the drive out 3 days later, what it was like to stand in the silence with the smell and know that something was north of her in the 40-meter window, and to make the decision not to go north. She said, "I've made decisions in the field before. I've been in situations where the correct call was not the comfortable call." That afternoon, standing on the transect with the recording running, the correct call and the comfortable call were the same call. I did not go north. I knew something was north of me, and I did not go north. I am telling you this so you understand that I am capable of telling the difference between the decision not to go somewhere because of fear and the decision not to go somewhere because of judgment. What I felt on the transect on August 10th was not fear. It was the specific assessment of a professional who has been in difficult terrain for 11 years, making a correct professional judgment. I am not going north. That was the judgment. I am telling you I stand by it. Tom Everett asked her, "What made you certain something was there?" She said, "I wasn't certain. I was assessing probabilities. Something large produces a smell that size. I am 5'4" and I weigh 130 pounds. The track on the clay bank indicates an animal of 80 to 90 kilograms minimum. Those are the variables. That's the calculation." Tom said, and the silence. She said, "Yes." The silence. The creek crossing at the northeast end of the base camp approach is a section of the tributary that widens into a gravel bar for approximately 30 meters before narrowing back into the main channel. The deer in Dr. Marsh's study corridor use this crossing daily during summer. She had years of behavioral observation at this location and a camera trap that had recorded 847 crossings across 4 field seasons. On the morning of August 11th, she positioned herself in the standard observation blind, upwind of the crossing, before first light. This was her protocol for behavioral observation at this location. She had done it more times than she had logged. At 06:12, 6 does entered the gravel bar from the east. They were moving toward the crossing in the standard formation. Lead doe ahead, the others in a loose cluster behind, with the normal pre-crossing behavior. The lead doe stopping at the water's edge, testing the wind, reading the far bank for 2 to 4 seconds before committing. The lead doe stopped at the water's edge. She did not look at the far bank. She looked north. Dr. Marsh has noted that in 4 years of observation at this crossing, she had never seen the lead doe orient north during the crossing approach. The crossing runs east-west. The orientation behavior is east-west. The north bank above the crossing is steep and heavily vegetated and provides no sight line that would be relevant to a crossing assessment. There was no reason for the lead doe to look north. The lead doe looked north for approximately 8 seconds. Then she turned and walked back east into the forest. The other 5 does followed her without hesitation. The crossing was aborted. Dr. Marsh sat in the blind for several minutes. She looked north, toward the steep bank and the dense vegetation above it. She could see nothing. She could hear, at this point, the normal ambient sound of the forest. The silence of the previous afternoon had not recurred. She had 2 thoughts, which she recorded in the field notebook in the order she had them. The first was, Sixth has just refused a crossing they have made daily for at least 4 years. The lead doe oriented north during the approach, which is not standard approach behavior. Something has changed the behavioral profile of this location for this herd. The second was she needed to go north to the observation point above the creek crossing, which required traveling the terrain she had decided not to travel the previous afternoon. She sat with the second thought for a while. She went north. The observation point above the creek crossing is a limestone outcrop above the north bank, approximately 15 meters above the water line. It provides a sight line down the gravel bar for the full 30 meters of its extent. She'd established it in her first season as a secondary observation position and had used it several times. She reached it at 0710. She set up her spotting scope. She looked down at the gravel bar. The gravel bar was empty. The does had not returned. She noted this. She noted the time. She began scanning the bank above the crossing with the spotting scope, working from the water's edge upslope. On the east bank, above the water line, in a section of exposed clay, below an overhang of root material, a second track. Not a single impression this time. 3 impressions in a stride sequence. The stride length was 1.8 meters. She looked at the stride length in her scope, and then looked at it again, and closed her eyes, and opened them, and looked at it again. A 1.8 meter stride in a canid configuration track is not possible. The stride to body size relationship in quadrupedal mammals does not produce a 1.8 meter stride at any body mass within the literature. The longest authenticated wolf stride on record is in the range of 1.1 to 1.2 meters at full gallop. 1.8 meters requires either a body length that no extant quadruped possesses or a gait pattern that is not quadrupedal. She looked at the track sequence through the scope for a long time. She wrote in her field notebook, stride length 1.8 meters. This is not possible for a quadruped of any known species at any gait. Checking for error. No error. The middle impression shows the 4-foot loading pattern of the track documented yesterday at the Claybank station. Same animal, moving across the east bank above the crossing sometime in the past 12 to 18 hours. The does saw this, and left. I am going to photograph these tracks and go back to camp. She photographed the tracks from the observation point. She climbed down to the bank level. She photographed the tracks from ground level with scale references. She went back to camp. She sat at the fire for a long time. It was coming closer to the camp. On the third night, August 11th into the 12th, Dr. Marsh did not sleep. This was not a decision. She lay in the tent, which was the same tent she had used for 4 field seasons at this camp. In the same location she had set it in, she did not sleep. She was not frightened in a way that produced acute symptoms. She was in a state of full-body alertness that she has described as the state she reached during the rescue of Paul Wickens in the winter of 1984. The state in which the cognitive and the physiological are both running at capacity and the body understands that they need to be. She lay in the tent and she listened to the night. At approximately 1:30, she heard something she could not identify. Not loud, not close initially. A vocalization from the north, from the direction of the creek crossing, the direction of the tracks. She has been careful in every account about how she describes this vocalization, because she is aware that the description is the part of the account most susceptible to embellishment, and she has not embellished it. She describes it as a sound she does not have a reference for in the regional or national fauna. It was not a howl, and she knows wolf howls, coyote howls, the bark sequences of the eastern coyote. It was not any of those. It was not the alarm bark of a white-tailed deer. It was not any vocalization she had encountered in 11 years of field work. It was a single vocalization. It ended. The ambient sound of the night continued around it without the complete cessation she had experienced on the transect. The night insects continued. The wind continued. She lay still. At approximately 02:15, she smelled it. The same smell as the previous afternoon. Fresh carrion and large animal musk. Warm, directional, proximate in the way that close-range proximity is proximate rather than long-range drift. She was in her tent. The tent wall was between her and whatever was producing the smell. She has noted that the smell inside the tent was stronger than the smell she had detected on the transect the previous afternoon. The transect was open terrain. The tent was enclosed. She is not sure how to interpret the strength differential. She lay still in the tent for an extended period she estimates at 30 to 40 minutes. She did not unzip the tent. She did not use her headlamp. She lay still. The smell faded. At some point it was gone. She does not know when it left, only that at some point she realized it was no longer present. She did not sleep after that. At first light, she exited the tent with her camera and her field notebook, and she walked the camp perimeter. She found what she was looking for and what she had been afraid to find. At the east edge of the camp clearing, in the soft duff between two red pines, she found a set of 3 impressions in the pine duff and the soft mineral soil beneath it. The 4-foot loading, the pad configuration, the scale. She had by this point made herself familiar with those characteristics from the photographs of the clay bank and the creek crossing tracks. The camp perimeter impressions were 8 meters from the tent. She photographed them. She measured them. She recorded the distances from the tent and the fire ring and the bear canister. Then she packed her camp. She was out a day early. She reached the south access point at 13:40, 6 hours ahead of Tom Everett's scheduled pickup. She sat at the trailhead for 6 hours. She has said that the 6 hours at the trailhead were among the most uncomfortable of her professional life, not because of anything that occurred during them, but because she spent the full 6 hours constructing the account she was going to give Tom Everett and failing to construct it in a way that satisfied her standards. She could not make the account sound like an account a wildlife biologist of her credentials should be giving. She gave it anyway. Tom Everett arrived at 1940. She got in the truck. She gave him the account. He listened the whole way to Traverse City without interrupting. He did not say it didn't happen. It didn't. She filed the full report within 2 weeks. 3 submissions. The state DNR, her university department, and the federal agency whose name she was asked not to include. She included the field notebook pages. She included the photographs, 17 of them, with scale references, across all 3 track sites. She included the audio recording from the transect on August 10th. She included the track measurements and the stride length notation and the weight estimate and the margin note about the plantigrade tendency of the medial pad separation. She included everything. The federal submission produced a response after 11 months. It was a single paragraph. Thank you for your submission of date. The materials have been reviewed by appropriate personnel. We have noted your observations and measurements. The matter remains under review. We appreciate your cooperation with the documentation process. The DNR produced no response. Her university department produced a response from her department chair, a man named Professor David Kellner, who asked to meet with her in his office. The meeting lasted 40 minutes. He asked her a series of questions that she understood as calibration questions, questions designed to assess her state rather than to gather information. He asked about her sleep in the field. He asked about her water sources. He asked whether she had experienced any illness in the weeks preceding the field session. She answered the questions. She told him the answers were not relevant to the measurements, which were taken with calibrated equipment under good conditions and did not require her to be well rested or healthy to be accurate. Professor Kellner told her the measurements would require additional review before the department could take a formal position. He told her he would be in touch. She has not heard from Professor David Kellner on this matter since the meeting. In the winter of 1987, she drove to the Manistee District Ranger Station in person with the cardboard box of field materials to submit a physical copy of everything. Richard Faber received the box. He told her the measurements would require additional review. She drove home. This is the drive that produced the photograph. Tom Everett, who accompanied her on the drive, took it in the parking lot. The expression on her face in the photograph, the expression he described as a person who has just remembered something they were trying not to remember, was, she has since confirmed, exactly that. She had been thinking, walking back to the truck after Richard Faber told her the measurements would require additional review, about the track at the edge of camp. 8 meters from the tent, the 4-foot loading, the medial pad separation. She had been thinking about the fact that she had lain in the tent while the thing that left that track stood 8 meters away. And she had been thinking about the 1952 document. The 1952 County Land Survey addendum came to Dr. Marsh's attention through a colleague named Elena Voss at the University of Michigan, who had been researching land classification records in the Manistee corridor for a separate study. Elena Voss found the document in a county records archive in a filing category that had been reclassified in 1957. She photographed it and sent it to Dr. Marsh because it contained a reference to the northeastern section of the Manistee corridor, the same corridor Dr. Marsh had been studying. The surveyor's name is redacted on every copy Elena Voss was able to obtain. The redaction is not original to the document. It was applied at some point after filing. The document itself is a standard land use survey addendum: location, acreage, soil classification, timber assessment, water features. Standard. The marginalia are not standard. The margins of the document contain handwritten notes in a different hand from the main body text. The notes appear to have been added at the time of the survey, not later. The ink color and fading are consistent with the body text. Someone was making notes as they surveyed in the margins of the official form. Elena Voss transcribed what she could read. She sent the transcription to Dr. Marsh. 3 of the marginal notes are relevant to this account. They are reproduced here in their original phrasing, with the specific geographic notations omitted at the request of the county records office. Note 1. Deer sign, dense east of omitted, but animals not present. Unusual for August. Grass cropped, but no scat, no beds. Something keeping them moving. Note 2. Track at omitted creek bank. No reference. Size suggests domestic cow, but configuration is canid. Team will not approach further. Recording position only. Note 3. Partial lower margin, partially illegible. Smelled it first, before the quiet. Not an animal I can name, and I have been in this forest. Illegible. Does not belong here, or it has always been here, and we are what doesn't belong. The county survey was conducted in August of 1952, 35 years before Dr. Marsh's field session. Same corridor, same time of year, same anomaly in the ungulate behavior, same track at the creek bank, same smell, same sequence. And the third note, smelled it first, before the quiet. Dr. Marsh received the transcription from Elena Voss in the spring of 1988, 7 months after her own field session. She has described her response to reading it as one of the few moments in her professional life in which the data and the experience arrived at the same point simultaneously. She called Elena Voss. She told her about the August field session. She told her about the smell before the silence. Elena Voss was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "The note says, smelled it first." Dr. Marsh said, "Yes." Elena Voss said, "And you smelled it first, too." Dr. Marsh said, "Yes." The call ended. They have remained colleagues. They do not discuss the Manistee corridor. Dr. Caroline Marsh, not her name, retired from field work in 2014 after 27 years. She does not live in Michigan. She has agreed to this account being assembled and presented under the conditions stated: pseudonym, institutional names withheld, the federal agency name withheld. She has reviewed the account for accuracy and confirmed that the measurements, timestamps, and physical descriptions are reproduced correctly. She has one addendum she asked to be included. In the summer of 2006, 19 years after the Manistee field session, she was in the Upper Peninsula for a separate study. She was not in the Manistee corridor. She was in a different forest entirely, a different formation, different fauna, different everything. She was on a trail in the early morning when the ambient sound ceased. She stopped walking. She smelled the carrion and the musk, warm and directional, from the north. She stood still for 11 minutes. She did not go north. The silence ended, the smell faded, the forest resumed. She turned south and walked out and drove back to her motel and sat on the edge of the bed for a while. She called Tom Everett that evening. She told him what had happened. He listened. He said, "Same sequence." She said, "Yes." He said, "Smell first." She said, "Smell first." They sat on the phone for a while without talking. She has not returned to the Upper Peninsula. She has not returned to the Manistee. She does not do field work in old-growth northern Michigan forest. She does not believe this is a coincidence. She is not afraid of the forest in general. She is precise about this when asked. She is not afraid of the forest. She is afraid of the specific sequence, the smell, then the silence, then the standing still, then the decision not to go north, which has so far been the right decision and which she is not confident would remain the right decision if she were to encounter the sequence a third time. She does not know what would happen the third time. She has decided she does not need to find out. The 1952 surveyor wrote, "We are what doesn't belong." She has thought about that sentence across 37 years. She has arrived at the following position. The surveyor was right about something. She is not sure the surveyor was right about everything. She is not sure that what she encountered in August of 1987 and again in 2006 is something that belongs to this forest in the sense of originating in it or living in it. She is open to the possibility that it passes through, that the Manistee corridor is not the territory, but the root, that the smell and the silence and the tracks in the clay are what a passing produces, not what a residency produces. She does not know what the route leads to in either direction. She did not go north. She does not know what is north. The field notebook still exists. The photographs still exist. The recording still exists. The case files from 1987 are still open. The 1952 county survey addendum is still reclassified. The clay bank is still there.